help me welcome Dr. Brynn.
Thanks, Jirka. Thank you, Jirka, for that lovely introduction, and Liz, and of course DPI and Oracle for having me. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for bringing me to Ottawa. It's gorgeous here. As Jirka mentions, my research looks at how we can use applied neuroscience and positive psychology to understand our brains better so that we do better work. Now, it's also how we live our better lives, how we become more successful, which is the substrate of my research, which I will show you, and what I just wrote a book about, so that you can learn even more if this is of interest to you. Now, so you're working all day, every day. Your brain is constantly developing thoughts for you based on your mindset, based on your life, your experiences. We've often called that simply mindset. Your default mode network is basically your mindset. It's basically how you think when you're not thinking. It's the messages you give yourselves, the narratives you tell yourself when you're not thinking. When we look at the research around how it is then that we are going to inform people who are already doing really well to do even better, we have to tackle mindset. Carol Dweck in 2006 came out with a book around growth mindset. Did any of y'all read that? Hands up, you did. I like that. Carol Dweck wrote this book around fixed and growth mindset. 2006, it really swept through corporate life, swept through psych labs, heard about it every day. She was talking about how some people have a fixed mindset. They don't really believe they can change or grow or learn new things or come up with new ideas. Failure is typically externalized. It's not internalized. Other people they get very jealous of. Growth mindset is the opposite. It's the belief that I can grow, I can develop, I can fail, but I can learn. I can move on. There are skills that they can be developed. They're not just inborn. Now, what's true, people often miss this point, is that you can be fixed and growth both simultaneously as well as in different facets of your life. Okay, so some people feel fixed about certain things and other people feel growth mindseted about some different things. There are other areas that they're more comfortable with. So fixed and growth is good. We want to be growth mindseted. We sometimes referred to that as resilience. Somebody who had a growth mindset was more resilient. And Google said, you know what? Let's start to do hiring and the application process based on people's adaptability and the resilience that they show psychometrically. So we developed these inventories of how it is that you could ask this question. How do you find out if someone's resilient or has a growth mindset? And so we did, and they were interviewing for it, and it was fine. And we definitely wanted to eschew anybody with fixed or fragile mindsets. Anyway, 2012, because I work in business often, because I deal with corporate companies, I read about this guy he was a professional risk taker in his mind, a polymath. He disappeared to France to write a bunch of philosophical manuscripts. He did this after he was a swing trader and was pretty well bored of that career, obviously. Nicholas Nassim Taleb said, there is a circumstance where resilient isn't the best. And this is the quote: the resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. Then the question arises is how do we as individuals make sure that what we are doing with our life and with our brain and with our careers doesn't, and all the strife that comes with that, how do we make sure that we're better? He didn't have answers. He was talking about accepting risk and microdosing risk inside of financial systems. He was not a psychologist, definitely didn't know anything about neuroscience, definitely nothing about medicine. So for the longest time, I sat with Taleb's theories, thinking, I know I've heard this before. I know there's a way to actualize this for people, for you and me, in terms of how we do better in our life, but I couldn't put my finger on it until I could. In the pandemic, I went to Harvard Medical School's research facilities and decided that we were going to put on basically what was a new reinformation campaign about different disease states as well as different organs. My organ, of course, the brain. And so my research looks at how do we make sure that there is lack of more good information and a lack of disinformation in the world about the human brain in particular, but especially for those who use it as their primary tool for work. You use your human brain as your primary tool for work. Here's what we found out. It turns out that in the medical literatures, fixed and fragile were also the equivalent of what we would call disequilibrium. Growth and resilient were the equivalent of homeostasis. You've probably heard that if you took 11th grade bio or chemistry. But there was this circumstance wherein something got better. It was anti-fragile. It was flourishing when it was under strife and duress. And that was something we called allostasis. This is something that doesn't stay the same. It gets better. In medical literature and in the world, there's these three cases effectively, okay? We say there's worst case scenario. This is system damaging stuff. You're in disequilibrium, you're causing problems, and you're going to end up with a lot more of them. There's base case, homeostasis. This is a circumstance where it's sustainable, but it's not thwarting disease, disaster, or disorder. And then there's the ultimate circumstance. We call this allostasis. It's the best case. This is a circumstance where the system is not only resilient, it is getting better every time it has a shock or a stress or a problem. Here again, there wasn't a ton of research on this yet. From Taleb's perspective, what do we do, you and me? Well, how do we make use of this? I found this. In the allostatic response, there are basically two ways we understand this is reified in the literature. All the research predicates themselves on understanding this. There's two things your body as a whole system, brain-body system, can do with stress, okay? It can absorb it and have disorder happen, or it can absorb it and have better order happen, allostasis. How you respond to stress is partly decided by your experiences, your genome, intergenerational truths, the stuff that's happened to you. There are other options, and that's the behavioral responses that we have to stress. Now, sometimes those are highly adaptive, and sometimes they are not. They are maladaptive. So there are basically these two areas we look at, two buckets of saying, okay, if I'm going to make somebody a superhero, mentally really strong, I have to make sure that they can overcome their individual issues, the stuff they can't control. You do not get to pick what eye color you had or the things that happened to you or your traumas or your genome, not under your control. But behavioral choices are. They are under your control. And they allow for allostasis and antifragility, and this is the core of my research, including what went into the book. I call it the merit framework. This represents thousands of hours of research that shows there are these 5 domains that, if not mutually exclusive, are collectively exhaustive for how to ensure your mental peak performance. Okay, so these 5 domains, if you can master them, there's no other levers, there are no other triggers, there's nothing else to know. This is it. Let me start with what is the merit framework. Simply, it is move, eat, rest, interact, and the thing that we just hearkened to that I'll talk the most about is what to think, is how to control your thoughts so you neuroplastically build your best brain. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't tell you a little bit about like food and movement, right? I can't miss these things. Under movement, there are a few options. You know these people. There's the worst case, the base case, and the best case. This is maybe the worst case, is what we would consider to be somebody who's very sedentary. In fact, these people, not only do they not have a movement plan, we typically see these ones in clinic when they all of a sudden decide they're going to, on the New Year's resolution, January 2nd, they're going to get really into physical activity, and they hurt themselves because they tear their ACL. So not ideal is the base case, or rather worst case. There's a base case scenario, though. This is what most people, if you've read most things in mainstream media, this is what most people do. They have a movement plan. It's 3 to 4 days a week. They're pretty active. They try to be active. They try to do some cardio and some weights. They know the basics. Here's the best case scenario. Best case scenario is not just that they're moving 3 to 4 days a week. It's preferably actually that they're moving 5 days a week, but with, and this will surprise you, not with supreme intensity. Okay, so a little bit more in the way of moderate but consistent. Less in the way of super aggressive. You wouldn't believe the number of people who come to me and say like, okay, so I started doing like P90X like every day, okay, 7 days a week, and I'm injured and I'm in pain and it's not really working, because you're giving yourself no downtime. Do you work? Is typically my next question. Yeah. Do you have a family? Yeah. How's your life going? You kind of stressed? Yeah. Yeah. You know what's going to happen? You are going to cause yourself cortisol spikes that are going to increase how much fat deposition you have. They're going to increase how much estrogen you have. They're going to decrease how much muscle mass you carry. So all of a sudden, you're working out 7 days a week, but for whatever reason, your BMI is getting worse and worse and worse. More fat, less muscle, and you're stressed, and you're not sleeping. And in the brain waves that I would look at in a fMRI as an example, I'd see something called alpha blocking, where you're in beta waves all the time, and the good, relaxing alpha waves that you want to have, especially after a workout, they're blocked. They can't come in, and they won't let you sleep. So these people typically also have sleep disturbances, all kinds of problems. The ideal case is twofold. One, this person does work out, but moderately, 5+ days a week. In fact, he's not sedentary ever. Like, he's never taking a day where it's not really active recovery, but isn't so intense that they're hurting themselves or in cortisol spikes or causing sympathetic nervous system fight or flight responses. These people also typically have a goal. So whether it's to run a half marathon, run the full, do a 5K, whatever they're doing, doesn't have to just be running either, it can be any goal. The goal allows for something. Have any of you ever read Grit by Angela Duckworth? Yeah, some of you, good. It allows for what she talks about a ton, which most psychologists do, which is called deliberate practice. And it's best case for not only how you improve at anything, but how you ensure your brain is one that is a useful place to be, that is functional when it comes to improving your skills. So deliberate practice is really important, and having a known and knowable goal is really critical for this. So something that you're aiming toward. There's another piece to this. If that goal can include others or be part of something social, ideal. Because as we will talk about, your brain is very highly social. So it cares a lot about what other people are doing. And so if you can combine your physical time with your social time, it's the best case scenario. Your brain loves it. Under normal circumstance, if you go running, let's say, I would then take, let's say, a blood serum test for you afterward. You would have a lot of things like enkephalins and endorphins. You'd have dopamine, which is the get it done hormone. You'd have serotonin, the happy hormone, some norepinephrine, some glutamate. I'd be starting to see all the basics for more growth hormone once you go to sleep. If you do it socially, I also see increases in things like enkephalins, oxytocin, which is the love and happy and healthy social dynamic hormone. So there's a lot more hormones that start to circulate when you do it socially than when you do it in isolation. Okay, so that's best case scenario. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, you gotta move, and here's best how to do it.